David, this morning we're going to continue our conversation. Forgive me, this afternoon. Of course, it's morning where you are, as time zones differ around the world. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, Jason. Good to be with you.
Always lovely to see you. I think, David, our viewers really appreciate your unique style of informed speculation about the possibilities that technologies and techniques and fairly hidden entities could potentially allow, how technological havoc could be wreaked on unsuspecting citizens of the world.
Well, absolutely. And if you go back through the patent office to 1811, I forget the guy's name, maybe it was a Mr. Hall. He'd invented a rifle, and he approached the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, a Dr. William Thornton, who incidentally designed the Capitol building. And this guy, Thornton, was an Anglo-American. The fellow who wanted his rifle patented was told by Thornton, it's already been done. I think Thornton was referring to the Ferguson patent of that wonderful year, 1776. But Thornton said, however, if you add my name to the patent, I'll give you a patent, you see. So there was corruption back in 1811 about the year NM, yeah, that's it, John H. Hall, about the year NM Rothschild and Sons Limited was formed in London, the fifth oldest bank. And fast forward to the present, when we're talking about deep forces in the shadows, NM Rothschild is the investment banker for Donald H. Trump and for Serco and Queen Elizabeth II. So
Donald J.
all
Trump.
of these.
Sorry, David.
Donald J. Trump. All right.
And
kinetic. So, yeah, and so yeah, these deep dark forces, like the meeting on the 47th floor of Serco shareholders, it's very much in the news, I think, or it should be. Over to you.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, David, I think that the repetition of some of these key points is important because, you see, there are people out there who are perhaps disappointed that you and I don't run this particular show in the way they would like to have it run. But of course, that's not what Crowdsource the Truth is about. It's not about people emailing me or you or making videos to implore us to do this, that, or the other thing. There's a lot of people who like to ask the question, why isn't Jason talking about this? And of course, I'm not here to be directed by other people, certainly not malicious actors. And the simple answer to a question like that is that there's no way for you or I to know everything about everything. And when we deal with complex occurrences like the things that happened on September 11th, 2001, I'm sure someone could select virtually any topic in that entire matter and spend months and years writing about it. You could write about just one aspect of construction material of the World Trade Center and explore it in tremendous depth. Someone could be an expert on that and know nothing about some other aspect of it. And the person could ask, well, why is this person talking about the paint used in the elevator shaft at the World Trade Center and they know nothing about Flight 175? So these are irrelevant arguments. And of course, the goal of many of these people, David, is to derail us from the conversations and investigations that you and I engage in. And I do think that our generous Patreon sponsors enjoy the process that you've developed of asking questions about particular technologies, about searching the patent office, identifying patented technologies, and asking, would it be possible for this technology to be utilized perhaps in whatever way we might be exploring with regard to various unsolved crimes. So I do want to thank our generous sponsors, people who are watching us on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That's David's Patreon page. And of course, at 2 o'clock Eastern today, we'll begin our subscriber exclusive program. And people can also watch that on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. David, we're going to continue today to focus on these Boeing 787 MAX incidents and the fact that it's now grounded. Boeing stock has taken a notable dive, something that certainly Boeing shareholders can't be happy to hear, but people who might be shorting Boeing stock or wanting to buy it low and wait for it to go back up would certainly enjoy. So there's a number of different things we're going to discuss today. But, you know, David, I was looking at this Stuxnet virus. Some of these people I'm alluding to are very persistent in trying to convince people that you and I don't know what we're talking about. We don't know anything about military networks and the operation of these covert, what are they, confidential networks? What is it?
Classified networks.
Right.
Swagger is an expert in that.
Exactly. So the point is, you and I are not experts in these fields, but we are asking important questions. Now, I want to raise a general point about this, David. Many people know that before I had created Crowdsource the Truth, I ran a 3D production company called 21st Century 3D, and I've developed a number of different stereoscopic camera systems. Now, I don't currently hold any patents on these things because when I went through the traditional route of applying for and obtaining patents, there was a huge cost associated, and I ultimately didn't do it. But I did, with a small team of non-engineers at our office in New York City, I reverse engineered, curiously enough, some Panasonic DVX100 cameras and some Apple Mac Mini computers to create this Frankenstein-like conglomeration of electronic equipment that resulted in what is now an internationally famous stereoscopic motion picture camera. And I can tell you, David, that when I sought out to do this first, I did consult experienced engineers at Panasonic, experienced engineers at Apple Computer, and all of them told me that what I was proposing was absolutely ridiculous and would be impossible, that reverse engineering and human soldering these 8-layer printed circuit boards that were designed by computers and automated factories would just simply destroy all the components and would never work. However, 5 of these cameras were ultimately built, deployed around the world, and have shot many 444 RGB uncompressed stereoscopic motion pictures. So again, I think that you and I asking questions that might defy traditional engineers in these fields, or I should say might defy their understanding of how these things are intended to work and how they should work, well, it doesn't matter until you actually ground truth, your hypothesis, by actually slicing in half 2 Panasonic DVX100 cameras, cutting open 2 Apple Mac Mini computers, desoldering all the components you don't want, and wiring this stuff together to actually make a functional video camera. Well, no engineer could deny that this works, and it did exactly what I wanted it to, even though that's not what it was originally intended to do. What do you think of that?
Well, I think, first of all, I take my hat off to you. I believe you've got obviously a highly inventive, creative mind. And people like you visualize in the mind where they want to go and then go there, right?
Yes.
But that gift of visualizing where you want to go to, it's spread very thinly in the community. Now, over my right shoulder, you'll see this illustrated image, and we could talk about that some other time. Mm-hmm. This is a elevated, adaptable, zero-emission monorail track, which I designed to go over the median line of the highway. Mm-hmm. And it would include in its modern form a reinforced thermoplastic pipe containing compressed air at about 1,000 psi, 4-inch diameter along a length, let's say, from Vancouver to San Diego. It's a complete revolution in transport. It would use aerospace technology like regional jets, and these carriages would fly over the motorways or auto routes or highways at about 40 or 50 feet at 200 clicks. And it's a revolution. So I came along, I used technology borrowed from the oil industry. It's mounted up on drill collars, and everyone tells me I couldn't do it.
Right.
And then I find the realpolitik is, for example, when I proposed it for the Winter Olympics up at Whistler, a rather muscular gentleman with a pinky appeared and said, well, that's not the way we do things here. And these contracts go to a company like SNC-Lavalin, where the RAV line from Vancouver Airport to downtown is $100 million a kilometer. And my system would be about $5 million a kilometer. It's plug and play, and you could take it away afterwards. So I understand. And so when I am, let's say, an untraditional engineer, I've never thought of myself in a box. So I conceive of things like the deductive computing machine and the fractal paintbrush, which I can now use to analyze crime scene investigations, even though I developed it and used it in the 1980s for oil field interpretation. Yeah, thanks. So you just popped up the homepage of my site. And if I may, I'll just talk about that logo, because you had a very informed listener who wrote in about the repetitiveness of what you and I do. And I read very carefully what that person said. And he'd obviously been listening very carefully to the content, because he talked about Christine Marcy and this and that and the other, but bemoaned allusions to DOJ pride and that sort of thing. But let me point out, it's all very well for people to absorb what we say, but they hear and they forget. They see and they remember. They actually have to do to understand. So what I want to convey today is how important it is and what it means to ground truth a theory, right? So there is a theory that a guy called Osama bin Laden, sweating it out on a dialysis machine in Dubai or squatting on a yak in a cave in Afghanistan, put together a highly synchronized attack that brought the most powerful nation in the world to its knees. Well, I can tell you that didn't happen. Even my son, when he was 11 years old, obviously he has constant conversations with me, and it must be very disturbing to have a father like me. But even my son at 11 years old knew that it was impossible to have these effects, like planes flying into buildings and then the buildings coming down, right? So what does ground truthing mean? I think the easiest way to understand what ground truthing means is to ground truth the crime scene investigation before you bother with ground truthing the crime theory. So, okay, Osama bin Laden, cave in Afghanistan, America loses the World Trade Center buildings and the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. What's most important, right? Maybe we could just flick over to the storyboard, because that's what I'm inviting our listeners to sponsor in my case, because the storyboard, in a way, it can encapsulate the work we collectively do, but have a beginning and a middle and an end. So if you pop up the storyboard, maybe I could
just a second. Sorry, David, the computer's a little jammed up here.
Okay, no problem. So I didn't know this terminology of the storyboard, so people have been telling me, David, that's not a storyboard, and I said, well, it is, because I called it, like Alice in Wonderland. I've never made a film, right? So storyboard to me tells you the procedures in the film, where you have a plot point at the end of Act 1 and Act 2. And another friend has told me about the importance of developing what is known as a character arc. That is to say, the characters have to grow through the film, so that the audience starts to understand the motives and the directions and the ramifications of this. So across the top of my storyboard, for which I'm soliciting funds through our sponsors, and they've been an enormous help, but I believe we need to go viral on it. There's a few images that are important. For example, at the center top row, we have Mr. Wilbur Ross. Now, Wilbur Ross is a fascinating character, principally because he's been interviewed by you, right? And as the Commerce Secretary, with the Patent Office in his bailiwick, if you will, this was at the occasion when Ross and his cronies were celebrating the 10 millionth patent signed off in the US Patent and Trademark Office, which was related to a Raytheon 3D laser imaging system, where you could actually rebuild something such as, and amazingly enough, what they decided to do commensurate with the publicity was to give you the laser picture of ground zero after the buildings have been demolished, and pretty devastating. Anyway, this guy, I think he's 80. I think he's gone long past his sell-by date, right? But he pretended not to know that the Patent Office was effectively run by the British company Serco, which has been under investigation in the United Kingdom for charging the taxpayer for transporting prisoners, where those prisoners were ultimately deemed to be either dead, back in jail, or overseas, or never being charged with anything. So Serco is a very, very suspect and dodgy organization. And I would argue that why would Mr. Trump or this guy Wilbur Ross allow Serco to run the United States Patent and Trademark Office? But I'll come to that. Over on the right, we have Christine, I call her Conair Catalog Marcy. She's the sister of Field McConnell, with whom I founded Able Danger way back when, probably, I think, December 2006, even though it didn't have that name.
Sorry for interrupting, David, but I think it's important that we say that you and I are no longer in any way affiliated with Field McConnell or Able Danger. We don't control what Field says. There's things he says we agree with. There's things he says we disagree with. He's his own guy.
Yes. However, by January of 2007, I had done a pretty thorough background check on Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, and briefed him on it. And some of the things that I'd found out before and subsequently allow me to give her this nickname, Conair Catalog Marcy, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that she launched some amazing programs and systems in the 1980s, starting with the database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which would have given her access to children that could be missed and exploited because their parents were dead or in jail. And that's a huge database. She launched with Eric Holder the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which basically, if you're driving around in a Lamborghini and the authorities think you haven't made enough money to buy it, they'll confiscate the Lamborghini, flog it, and then use it to fund some private security firms' operations like, I don't know, the Waco attack or blowing up the Murrah building. And she, I believe, using money stolen from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, she bought a Boeing 727 and then went on to form the biggest prisoner transportation system network in the world, known as the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, nicknamed Conair. So she's the go-to person if you wanted to, let's say, blow up the Murrah building, right? Because in her brief or bailiwick or whatever you like to call it, she can find all of the experts in explosives of the kind who could put a convincing display together in the Murrah building. And Americans should understand there were multiple bombs in the Murrah building, and one of them was under the daycare center. So when people criticize us for going on about Christine Marcy, I refuse to be criticized. In fact, I say to Americans, you've got to check this woman out, right? She's the sister of Field McConnell, who would appear to have blown the whistle on a lot of things that went on 911. But as far as I'm concerned, he's talked the talk, but he hasn't walked the walk, because this woman should have been hauled before the courts and asked, well, what were you doing on 911? And I can tell you what she was doing, but I don't want to spend too much time on her. If you go down a bit, and you'll see a couple of guys, because this fellow Swigert, in his ramblings, has said, who would have the power, and I don't know whether he's expecting us to answer it, but I think I can answer it, or whether he's asking a rhetorical question because he thinks he knows who had the power to deploy Russian Bear aircraft on the northern border of Alaska prior to a war game or a continuity of government exercise, such that the Americans deployed, 340 airmen and various associated equipment to the north, northern end of Alberta to intercept these Russian Bear aircraft during a continuity of government exercise. Right? Now, when he says who would have the power to deploy, well, let's look at the guys to the right and the left of the Entrust evil hacker, Mr. Swigert. We have General Alexander Haig, right, who was Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and he's the guy who said, I'm in charge here, right, after Reagan was shot. So the guy, I think he's got a very bizarre attitude to life, and he may have misspoken about that. But over on the other side, you have General John Shalikashvili.
Ah, yes.
Now, General John Shalikashvili is an interesting character. Sorry about the resolution of this stuff, but, things will improve if the money improves, right?
Sure.
Right? So General John Shalikashvili was sent by what I call a rogue or evil teacher, because he was on faculty at the University of Arkansas, Bill Clinton to China in 1997 to give a presentation to the generals of the People's Liberation Army University in Beijing. And at the end of that presentation, General John Shalikashvili said, "I have been instructed by my president to leave behind details of all America's weapons programs." So this is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? And he comes back to the United States, and instead of being lined up against a wall, or at least put before a military tribunal for treason with his president, Bill Clinton, he was allowed to get a very nice gig with Boeing.
Right.
Right? So now, I mean, Americans, wake up. So this guy then leans on the Boeing directors through means foul or fair, I don't know, but quite possibly involving the Con Air pedophile piloted pimping network put together by Phil McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, and persuades the Boeing directors to do one of the most stupid things they've ever done in their lives, which is move the headquarters of Boeing from Washington State, close by the production facilities of Boeing, down to Chicago. Well, what goes on in Chicago? Well, we have the Chicago outfit. We have, apparently, when you send someone into Chicago, the entrenched forces there will say to you, "Who sent you?" So when Barack Hussein Obama arrives in Chicago, I don't know who sent him, right? But they're probably not very nice people who sent him. And he fetches up in a company called Sidley Austin, the law firm in Chicago. And he's mentored with his wife-to-be, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson, by Bernardine Dawn, who is the co-leader of the Weather Underground terrorist organization, with her husband, Bill Ayers. So now you have what I call the 6 sociopathic teachers, because at the University of Arkansas, I'm presuming the 2 former faculty members, Bill and Hillary Clinton, would have been getting benefits through the TIAA, the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, the largest private pension fund in the world. You've got Sidley Austin back in the late 1980s, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson and Barack Hussein Obama, who would go on to be on faculty at the University of Chicago. And then you've got Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers, who are on faculty at Northwestern University and the University of Illinois Chicago, respectively, where the University of Illinois Chicago hosts the EVL network. So I rambled on a bit, but if you wanted to pick on any one of those characters, I can, but I don't want to pick up too much of the show. I'm just doing some background. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting background because, again, it's, we've got these guys who are so persistently trying to get people to not listen to what we're saying. And, they've written letters to the various companies that we're talking about. We certainly would invite Christine Marcy, and in fact, I've tried several times to contact her directly to ask her about these things, because certainly if we have any of it wrong, I'd like to be corrected. Now, in the case of our persistent detractors, they're constantly putting out fake and false information about you and I. They've falsely said that you had claimed to be a PhD. You never said that. They've falsely said that in order to be a forensic economist, you must be a PhD. That was shown to be incorrect when we had a conversation with the executive director of the Association of Forensic Economists, and we've explained ad nauseum that if you picked up a motion picture camera and made a motion picture, you are in the act of being a cinematographer. And as a matter of fact, just the other day, when I went to the Second Circuit Appellate Court hearing involving Alan Dershowitz, who had defended Jeffrey Epstein, who very well might be involved in this pedophile pilot network. We know Jeffrey Epstein had his own plane, actually his own planes. It's certainly within the realm of possibility that Epstein would want to hire pilots who are at least consenting with the notion of a pedophile flying people around, and Bill Clinton's directly linked to that. So it's just so strange that when we start asking these questions, these guys appear and their one goal is to sue Crowdsource the Truth for all kinds of allegations that they've made that keep falling down in court. They stand on the top of a mountain and use a network of incompetent operatives in the social media sphere along the lines of what you've described, David, with this kinetic social engineering protection apparatus, and they keep failing. But I don't want to spend so much time talking about them. I do think part of their goal is to occupy our bandwidth. I mean, it's obvious they want to use up my time answering their stupid lawsuits. But it's interesting to me how they are really bullies and cowards, because they now have done exactly what I anticipated they would do. They're relying on operatives within this conspiracy who are outside of the United States and are very well insulated from any civil action within the United States court system. If you're living in New Zealand, if you're living in Poland, irrespective of how stupid you might be, it becomes very difficult to take any kind of civil action against that person. People who live in Arizona and engage in conspiracies to commit mail fraud, well, they could be in a lot of legal trouble if the civil court finds, as I've alleged, that this entire matter is a fraud on the court and that the U.S. postal system was used to perpetrate that fraud. There could be serious criminal legal consequences for these people that the foreign faction, the small foreign faction, David, is not necessarily susceptible to.
Okay, so let's just go back to the cover to the beginning of this show, because I think what you've got there, you've actually nailed it. Let's go back to a little bit of terminology here. The ransom note for the John Benet Ramsey murder, which was a torture killing, was signed off at the end with SBTC. We'll come to that, the initialism. Above that was the word victory, exclamation mark. Well, you know, what kind of victory is in torturing a little 7-year-old to death in the most brutal fashion? But at the beginning of that ransom note, it talks about we represent a small foreign faction.
Yes.
Now, on the collage at the beginning, you have obviously the Federal Bridge. And what we've established now is, rather amazingly enough, that the Federal Bridge is joined to the Northwestern University IT partnerships, which is an enormous global network, through the state of Illinois.
Yes.
Which is the most corrupt state in the union.
May I pause you here, David? Because this is very important, and this might escape people. So it took me a little while to get this, and this is part of the reason why I do enjoy some of the repetition over some of these things. So what we're talking about is this Federal Bridge is potentially a closed network. There are a number of security measures taken so that the average person cannot stumble into secure, classified networks that are represented here in this infographic. Is that correct? Is my understanding correct?
Yes, it's a low bandwidth network where you can send privileged and confidential information between, so to speak, consenting adults without alerting other users of the network. So through a system of public and private keys,
right.
Developed and invented, I believe, by GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters in the UK, in the late 60s, and refined during the 70s, and began to be implemented in the 1980s. By the beginning of the 1990s, the company that had picked up this technology was Nortel Networks, and Nortel Networks spun off Entrust to implement this public key infrastructure. And now Entrust has implemented its system, public key infrastructure, all the way throughout the free world, the Five Eyes countries, etc. And the key root authority for this network is the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, which should worry the Americans, because if you go from the root authority, which is the UK MOD, over to the top right of the schematic, you'll see that essentially the UK MOD is plugged directly into 5 of the biggest defense contractors in the world whose assets were used on 911. So from the bottom up, you have the Boeing company, you have Northrop Grumman, you have Raytheon, you have Lockheed Martin, and a little further round, you have EADS, the manufacturer of Airbus.
Yes.
So now this should be very worrying because EADS competes with Boeing head to head. It's got a number of disputes in the World Trade Organization about subsidies to both companies, and obviously both companies are getting subsidies. They're just hauling in money through subsidies. Some are hidden, some are less well hidden. But wouldn't it be interesting if EADS, through the services of someone like David Swigert, was able to hack into the Federal Bridge and into the control systems of the Boeing MAX 8, including the maneuvering characteristics augmentation system, or the automated anti-stall system, where Boeing put in some software into the plane that crashed in Indonesia, the Lion Air, about 5 months before this one in Ethiopia. Now, again, this is a question that Mr. Swigert should really be answering, because he claims to be an expert in classified networks and ethical hacking and simulation. I believe he got fired by the Army.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, he's made a number of videos explaining how you and I know nothing about those things, and I concur, we don't, other than a general sense. I know nothing more about classified networks than I did about the operation of a Panasonic digital camera or an Apple computer at the time that I came up with this idea that would it be possible to put this all together into a 3D camera. Now, much in the way that the expert, Mr. Swigert, has spent copious amounts of time explaining how you and I can't possibly be speaking anything close to the truth because what we described is impossible, well, certainly the engineers at Apple Computer and Panasonic could have arrived at a similar conclusion. I must be mad. There's no way what I'm saying could be possible because according to their data and their explanations, it couldn't be done. So the point that I wanted to get at earlier, David, is that the reason I've come to understand, and correct me if my understanding is wrong, the reason that you keep talking about the Northwest University IT partnerships is that this is also a closed network, conceivably, communication between these international partners, but because the state of Illinois is on the Federal Bridge and it connects all of the other entities that are on the Federal Bridge together. And because the state of Illinois is part of this Northwest IT partnerships, the two networks interconnected can interconnect anyone in either of them to the other. Is that right?
Yeah, you're totally right. So when we talk about a man in the middle attack, the state of Illinois is superbly positioned to launch a man in the middle attack on any members of the Northwestern University IT partnerships around the world, which include the Russian Federation and various universities in China.
Right.
And any entity, sorry?
No. So that's what I want to, I'm trying to kind of like direct you, and I hope it's not frustrating people, but I want everyone to understand what I'm trying to understand, which is that you and I are raising questions saying, could this be done? We're not making allegations per se. We're asking, could these technologies, this is the nature of your investigative process, identifying technologies and saying, well, you know, like I did, I identified a Panasonic camera and an Apple computer that had unique characteristics that worked for what I wanted to do. And the question was, could they be made to interoperate together? The engineers that designed them said no, they could not, but I hacked the camera and the computer and created a new device that had capabilities that none of the other devices were originally intended to do. So with regard to the 737 MAX 8 crashes, I wanted to continue, and we'll be doing this in just under 30 minutes, David, when we continue the program on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I wanted us to continue our journey of questioning our speculative investigative process by looking at something called the Stuxnet virus, which I don't have a very deep understanding of. I've watched a few videos on YouTube, seen some lectures from experts who do talk about it, but as I understand it, this Stuxnet virus, which was only developed in 2007 or something like that, is the first digital weapon. It's a virus that originated on the Windows operating system, but was able to affect programmable logic controllers. And in this case, those PLC chips were controlling the functions of Iranian nuclear centrifuges. And what they did was, David, they injected fake news. They told the operators of the nuclear plant that everything was going fine, but then they had a secondary function, or I should say another concurrent function, which was to disrupt the normal operation of the centrifuges to actually cause physical damage and destroy them. So my only question is there some way to hack? I lack the ability to describe exactly technically how that hack would be done, but assuredly Mr. Swigert can educate us as to how you would need to go about doing it if you were to hack it. But the question is, could something similar to Stuxnet, which is now publicly available, open source on the internet, anyone can download it, and if you're a hacker, you can monkey around with it and make your own version of Stuxnet, but could it be used similarly to affect these Siemens manufactured programmable logic controllers that Boeing uses for enhanced automation standardization and safety for global manufacturing operations? Where do these PLCs exist in Boeing products, and what functions do they have? I don't know.
Okay, yeah, so let me just, if you can scroll down to the storyboard down at the bottom, and I'll show you how there are two clocks that are needed. One essentially a slow-moving date stamping clock, and another one a fast-moving telemetry clock of the type that is under the control, or was under the control, of Serco at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington in Middlesex, where the cesium fountain clock was invented in the 1954 period. And this relates to the kinds of date signals that are being sent with public key infrastructure over the Federal Bridge, and the fast telemetry signals needed to drive a missile gyroscope, which was presumably on the weapons platform that went across the Pentagon lawn at about 500 miles an hour at 10 feet elevation. So if you just scroll up a bit, and we'll show the date and the timestamp at the bottom of that image, and perhaps I can explain what was happening here. Yes. So you can see on the left-hand side, September the 12th, 2001, and that, I believe, is the date stamp of the voyeur in Queensland, who was watching the attack on the United States with a rather curious alibi that I think we've sussed out, where he signs a plate at the Salsa Bar and Grill, Bill Clinton, September the 11th, 2001, underlined multiple times, which makes me think that he's as thick as a bag of hammers. I mean, in one sense, he might be considered to be a member of the intellectual elite. But if you're leaving an alibi around, I mean, do something a little more sophisticated than that. But the point is, September the 12th, 2001 was the date in Queensland, Australia.
Yeah.
Probably Bill Clinton had repaired from the Salsa Bar and Grill to the Port Douglas Sheraton Hotel. And I would point out that Sheraton is one of the arms of the Starwood Hotel chain, which has been bought by Marriott. And Marriott now has 1 million beds around the world, or 1 million rooms. And in many cases, I think the Marriott Hotel has become a campus for fast fiber optic links, right? That is to say, an elite guest in an elite hotel can sit in front of a computer in his room and watch an attack in real time unfolding halfway around the world, and place bets on the body count or the time of death. Now, does that prove Bill Clinton did that? No, but does it mean that he have potentially the motive and the opportunity and weapon? And you know all this fuss that's being made about Russia and Trump and collusion?
Yeah.
Well, I would point out William Clinton was kicked out of Oxford for rape and dealing in cocaine and drugs in 1969. He was a Rhodes Scholar. And where does he go to? He goes to Moscow, right? Presumably to chat up his friends in the KGB. So you have or had a president in the United States that I would say from a security point of view is a complete frigging disaster, right?
Yeah,
That's not
I
putting
agree.
it too kindly. Okay, if we move on to down to the bottom of that storyboard, and that's why the importance of the storyboard is to flesh out the main characters, imply the character arc that they would develop in an evil reverse engineering of the crime scene. So over on the right at the bottom, we have the timestamp, which is very interesting. And you know what, Jason? I think this comes from a different clock, right?
Which timestamp do you mean, David?
Sorry, to the right of September the 12th, 2001, it says 1737:19.
Yes.
Right? Well, in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, it was 9:37:19. Right? So this is on the 24-hour clock. This is 8 hours later in the day. Oh, no, wait a minute. It's 24 hours. Yes, 8 hours later in the day. And that would put you in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where I used to live. And the air traffic control tower in Dubai, at Dubai Airport, International Airport, is run by Serco. So what that means is Serco could have been injecting telemetry signals. It's the world's largest non-state air traffic controller that operates 52 to 60 FAA contract towers in the United States. On the morning of 9/11, it would have been in position to impute precise telemetry signals for the aircraft that were allegedly hijacked by Osama bin Laden's team. Now, ground proofing would mean you'd get the people who watched the profile flown by whatever it was that hit the Pentagon, where the air traffic controllers, and I believe, I don't know whether Bush was watching a feed from the air traffic control, he said, well, that's an expert pilot. Well, Osama bin Laden apparently couldn't get hold of any expert pilots because an expert pilot's probably earning over $150,000 a year. So why run yourself into the building and die?
Well, we've also heard from other expert pilots that even an expert pilot could not execute such
right.
maneuvers.
Exactly, because if I can remember Phil McConnell's language, it was a tight sliced back turn of 270 degrees from 7,000 feet above the Pentagon to level off above the Pentagon lawn at 10 to 15 feet elevation at 500 miles an hour and speared through the window, the first floor window of the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, killing Captain Gerald DeConto and 124 or 125 of his technical colleagues. And when I say killing, obliterating them, Jason.
Yeah, quite
right?
obviously impossible,
yes,
according to what
not a
told.
Boeing aircraft, because a Boeing aircraft is an aluminum hull. The Brits say aluminium, but Americans say aluminum hull. It's got some plastic. It's got a number of bodies. It's got a couple of titanium engines, but it doesn't. And if you go back to that base of the storyboard over to the right, you'll see the hole that was created on the inner courtyard of the building, the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Right? It's about 12 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, with about 1.5 tons of debris inside the inner courtyard of the Pentagon. Now, you don't need to be a ballistic expert or whatever, but just looking at that, you realize the only weapons platform that could create that deal of punching a hole through 8 reinforced walls of the Pentagon is something like a rocket-boosted bunker buster or penetrator missile made by, for example, and patented by Lockheed Martin.
Yes.
Right?
Now, David,
So
we're just, sorry to interrupt, but I know you're on a roll. We're just about out of time here on YouTube and Periscope, and I hope Facebook is working. There's been some technical change to Facebook that the streaming to the Facebook group has been delayed. But people can join us, David, in just 15 minutes on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and also on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. People can also join us on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and you and I will be resuming this conversation just 15 minutes from now on those subscriber-only networks. And we want to thank our very generous subscribers, people who want to ask these questions. And certainly we want to thank Mr. Swigert for all of his diligent correspondence with the legal departments at the various companies that we speak of, the individuals who are involved. I believe he's alleged that he's contacted the lawyer for Burke Ramsey, who you and I fully believe is totally innocent of the horrendous crime. I mean, he's a man now, he's 30 or something, and obviously must struggle for his entire life with the brutal death of his poor little baby sister. We do not think that Burke Ramsey had anything to do with the murder, and we would welcome a conversation with his legal team, certainly with the Ramsey family. So I want to extend a polite thank you to David Swigert for his diligent efforts in sending these letters all around. I'm a little disappointed that not a single one of these companies or individuals has responded to us, and in fact, when I've reached out to them, they've resisted talking to us. I think because these are matters they probably don't want people asking about in a lot of cases. Certainly in the case of the University of Illinois Chicago, they did not want to talk about our questions.
Could I just give my Twitter handle?
Please. Oh, yes. Sorry, David.
That's right. I'm not really familiar with this technology, but I think I need to use it better. So it's at CSI Hawkins.
Yes. And I'm sorry I didn't have that ready, David. Let me bring that up, of course. People can go to Twitter and follow David there. It's also important that people remember they can go to Reverse CSI Scripts. That's David's webpage. This is separate from the Patreon page and totally free for people to look at. We don't have our subscriber-only videos posted on David's website, but of course people can go to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and follow us there. You can correspond with David and read about his research on reversecciscripts.com. And I'm bringing up Twitter as I ramble on here, David. I'll have it in just a moment. Of course, he is at CSI Hawkins. Boy, it's so slow sometimes. People can go to Twitter and get on to at CSI Hawkins. I'm sorry, David, I'll have that ready in the future. But David, I'll see you in just under 15 minutes on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, where we'll carry on the conversation. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jason.